Are you someone who has heard of bonds but are still a little confused about how they work and whether or not you need them? Well, keep listening as we answer some of the most common questions we get about bonds. Hello, and welcome to the Wealth Minded MD podcast with your money best friends. I'm Dr. Alicia Taylor.
And I'm Dr. Brittany Halford.
And of course, we're here to help you build wealth and make good money decisions so you can create the life you desire with more control over your time.
Alicia, can we talk about one of the most important money moves we've made as doctors? And I don't know about you, but for me, when I think about this, it's actually insurance. Yes, I know it's not sexy, but it is absolutely essential, especially disability insurance.
Facts. I got mine right after med school, before residency even started. And let me tell you, Prati Botto at PKA Insurance Group made the whole process so smooth. He actually cared, broke down everything, explained the fine print, and got me the best policy for the best price.
And what I love is that he treats everyone like that residents, attendings, even docs on visas. He literally got you. He's super responsive, super knowledgeable. And if there's a better deal out there, he will tell you.
Oh, and if you're healthy, you could get approved for up to 10 million in life insurance. So not just disability insurance in only 5 minutes. No labs, no hassle.
So if you're serious about protecting your income and your family, call 1-800-258-1018.
Or email pradeep at pkainsurance.com. All right, Brittany, what's going on in your world this week?
Oh my goodness. I'm always coming with my family issues and having a therapy session on the mic. So thank you, listeners, for helping us through. And thank you, Leisha, for your insights. Just yesterday, actually, I had to have a conversation with one of the instructors for an extracurricular activity that Brooke is engaged in for the summer. And it's like a math school, essentially. And they evaluated them, but then put her in the beginner class for the fall. Now, don't get me wrong. My kid doesn't have to be advanced in everything that they do, but I know how bright my daughter is and how quickly she does the homework every week. So I'm like, excuse me, do you mind sharing a little bit about how you evaluated the students and considered their placement for the fall? Basically, the teacher had no criterion for evaluation and kind of went over in her mind and said, oh, well, Brooke, I think she'll be fine for the more advanced level. But for me, it's like, well, why didn't you have this thoughtful consideration in the beginning instead of just placing her in a beginner's level? She is older than most students because her birthday is in September and the cutoff is September 1st. And she's extremely bright. Like she literally does the homework in the car in 5 minutes. So I don't want her to get too comfortable thinking that everything is going to come easy to her and that she therefore decreases her effort and she kind of relents when things become hard. And while I don't want that, I also don't want her to be bored and I don't want to waste my time and money. So I'm just like trying to strike the balance of being a mom who advocates for their child, but also not being like a bear and too aggressive. Anywho, so that's what's going on in my mom world.
That's interesting. Let me just start by saying that. It's so funny because you say you don't want to be a bear, but I definitely felt Mama Bear come out, even as you were recounting this. Like I could tell that you were fuming. I want to say, as people sometimes tell me, Leisha, you may not have thought that you said it in that way, but this is how it came out. Your face said it all. Your body language said it all. People tell me that all the time. But at the same time, I also want to give you kudos for not just saying like, why was my daughter placed in this class? But by first asking, can you share with me how you evaluated the students for their placement? I think that's a great way of phrasing it. And I want to congratulate you on that. I do think that it's alarming, though, that it seems like there was no real evaluation process. And I think if I were you, I would also feel a little bit like, why wasn't there an official evaluation process? And how do I move forward? I'm not sure what I would do in this situation. I'm not sure if I would have a different reaction than what you had in this situation. So honestly, I'm not even sure I'm the best person to get advice from. You probably need to talk to another mom who's been in this situation because I'm like, right on, Brittany, you did great. But yeah, I don't know what to say.
Well, thank you for cheering me on. Thank you for validating me. I think it's a fine line because you want to advocate for your children, but you don't want to be overly aggressive. And Also understanding that sometimes they can still benefit and have other positive influences, even if they're in a beginner level class. And so that's what is like, I also need to just challenge my notion of what a beginner versus advanced, and that she's not supposed to be advanced at everything. These are things that I'm sure will happen again. And I'm just learning how to be graceful in my advocacy, because this is not going to be the first time. Like, she's only in kindergarten. So we still have 12 years to go.
Wait, so they place them into beginner and advanced level in kindergarten?
So this is supplemental. This is supplemental. I don't know if you've heard of like Kumon, and they have like all of these other type of extracurricular that is more academic and math focused. So that's kind of what this program is. This is a math focused program for her. And from there, they do evaluations every year of when they move on to the next phase, the next grade, how they're going to place them in advanced versus beginner. And I think it even differentiates further once they get in the fifth or sixth grade. So it's just a math extracurricular activity for her enrichment program
In addition to school.
in addition to school. Mhm.
Okay, Miss, I'm not a bear. You like, Brooke, it's Harvard or bust for you. We're in the math club. We're going to be in the English club. We're going to be in public speaking classes. And you're going to play 20 sports, okay? I don't know if it's you being in Boston and all of your colleagues' kids are like eyeing MIT and Harvard and BU.
But this brings to mind that conversation that we had about when you listen to the podcast that the Surgeon General released that report that the parents are not okay, and how parents are still navigating this new age of how to involve our children. And so to your point, it's like, does she actually need all of this? And I ask myself that question all of the time. Am I just keeping up with the Joneses, or is this something that I want to do or should? I guess the shoulds don't really serve us, but is it necessary? And honestly, I don't think that it is necessary. We go to a really good school. And so it is supplemental. I don't know. We're doing it for right now. I've heard great things from other parents. So maybe it is a little bit of keeping up with the Joneses, but she doesn't mind it. She likes to challenge herself in this way. So here we are.
Here we are. I'm like, how do you have time? And you have another kid too, and a whole husband. You got all of them in like 30 extracurriculars. I'm sure your evenings from like 4 to 8 are like super busy. Weekends, I don't even want to imagine. While I'm sleeping in, you're probably like on activity number 3. Wow, you're doing a lot. So, okay, super mom.
Oh my. One day I'll be free again. But yes, I'm enjoying the ride. All right, Leisha, do you have any money confessions that you want to bring up? Anything that you can think about?
Similar to you, advocating for Brooke, I was trying to advocate for myself. And it's very different, but it was in the realm of credit card points and rewards and offers and bonuses and things like that. So I have a American Express card, a few of them, but one of my American Express cards has offers. I think a lot of them do. Like, you open the app and you can see various offers. And so it might say, oh, spend $100 in this store and you'll get 5 times the credit card points, or maybe spend $300 in this store and we'll give you a rebate of $50, something like that. And you can access these offers. They change, I think, weekly. In order for you to get the offer, you have to like add it to your card. So you just click a button and you add it to your card. I saw this offer. It was like spend $2,000, or maybe it's $1,000, something like that, on airline tickets. And we'll give you this rebate of $200 back. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, let me add that to my cart because I already needed to buy flights. We have the Cousins cruise I mentioned before coming up. And so maybe I can purchase one leg of the flights with cash and utilize this coupon. So anyway, I add it to the card and I buy the flights. The offer says you have to purchase the flights by a certain date. And I purchased the flight on that date. My receipt says that date. But usually with these offers, when you use them, you tend to get whatever the reward is pretty quickly, like within the next 7 days. A few weeks had passed and I still had not gotten the offer. So I reached out to American Express through their chat and was like, hey, just wanted to check in essentially. And what they told me was, Alicia, you bought the flights, but the charge didn't post until the next day, or the charge posted after the last date of the offer. And so you didn't qualify. And I was notably upset. The offer terms doesn't say that the charge needs to post by this date. It says you need to purchase it by this date. And my receipt says I purchased it on time. So anyways, going back and forth, had to speak to the agent and another agent, and then got transferred to a supervisor. But it eventually worked out. The supervisor was like, okay, in the future, make sure the charge posts by this date, but I will honor the offer and give you the money back. And so that was an instance of me advocating for myself. My friends thought it was funny because they were like, girl, you're a whole doctor and you are so adamant about getting this coupon. I was, but at the same time, I'm like, it's $200 back. I'm going to get my money. I'm the kind of person, if a gift card doesn't work, I'm calling a number on the back of the gift card. I know don't know if it was time well spent in terms of how much time and energy I put into this, but it was the principle of the matter of like, no, this
Mhm.
says this. You should have put that in there. You didn't put all that in there. I followed the letter of the thing. Thank you for honoring it for me. And so, just a little quick segue into me trying to advocate for myself. But I'm glad that it worked out because I ended up getting what I expected. So,
I'm glad that it worked out too. Yeah. Whenever I encounter those situations in hindsight, I always ask myself, was it worth my time? But to your point, sometimes you feel very adamant about making sure you get what you expected. And I think it's just part of that mismatch of this was your expectation and it didn't happen that way. And so, how can I still fulfill that desire and meet that expectation?
as physicians, one of the most important things that we can do is make sure that we secure our income because a lot of our financial plans are contingent on our high doctor income. One of the things that you will need to do is make sure that you get long term disability insurance.
Now, Pradeep and his team at PKA Insurance Group have a reputation for putting people over profits and always doing what's best. Do not hesitate to email PKA Insurance and his team today.
They will help you get the insurance you need with the service you deserve.
Well, Leisha, I'm so happy that you advocated for yourself. And, one of the things that I think is really important is that we also consider how we can support ourselves throughout our investing journey. And one of the ways that I think about that is by adding in a little bit of safeguards. And safeguards for me are kind of like bonds, more conservative investments. I know that they're good, going to give me a okay return, but they're not going to fluctuate as much as what we see in the stock market. Now, bots also confuse me a little bit, and I find them a bit boring at times. So I am hopeful that you can educate us on bonds. You can make this interesting and you can make it simple so we know how to add them or if we should add them into our portfolio.
Okay, no pressure. As you mentioned, one of the reasons why people add in bonds is for some stability. Over time, when you look at 10 years from now, 30 years from now, when you are invested in the stock market, so when you buy stocks or index funds full of stocks, they tend to go up over time. But when you look at small time periods, each year, each month, day to day, the value of the stocks in an index fund can fluctuate so that there is not as much variability from a day to day, month to month, year to year basis. Another reason why people add in bonds is because sometimes bonds outperform stocks. I know that sounds crazy to people who maybe have just started investing over the last 10 years, but just you don't have to look that far back to see a period in which bonds outperform stocks. And that was in the early 2000s. So from 2000 to 2009, bonds outperformed stocks. Part of the reason for that was the dot-com boom and bust that happened in the early 2000s. And then, of course, 2008, when the real estate market kind of crashed. And so both of those unfortunate events caused stocks to actually not perform very well. Most people's stock portfolio stayed stable when you look at from 2000 to 2009. But if you looked at the year to year variability, it actually decreased quite a bit. But those who had invested in bonds actually saw their portfolio increase in value during that time. And so I want to make sure that people don't forget that yes, bonds add some stability, but there are time periods in which bonds can actually outperform stocks. And so you want to make sure you have both of them in your portfolio. Now, as you mentioned, stocks will generally increase in value substantially more than bonds. For most people, especially those who are younger and further away from retirement, you want to make sure the amount or the percentage of bonds that you have is smaller compared to the amount or percentage of stocks that you have. But my point here is that bonds can still be valuable. And so I really do think that if you are going to structure your own portfolio, if you're going to be investing on your own, if you're going to be choosing how much of each thing to invest in, you should probably have some bonds. And more importantly, you should understand how bonds work.
I typically would not think that I'm investing in bonds because they're going to outperform stocks. It's nice to know that that can happen and that it provides, even with that, some stability because stocks have fallen. And so bonds might increase, allowing for you to reach your desired return on investment year by year, achieve your long term investment goals. But bonds still confuse me. And I think for many, is that we know we need some bonds, but how much? Because I'm trying to get as much as I can in the stock market. So I am not considering bonds as a component of my portfolio for outperformance, but just for stability. And if I want to ensure that I have enough in retirement, given my conception of bonds as like a more conservative investment, the amount of bonds in my portfolio, honestly, is very low, like 10%. So, how much bonds do we need? And can you tell us a little bit more about how to evaluate them? Because I'm at a loss.
I agree with you. When you are younger and further away from retirement, you may want some stability in your portfolio, but you may not need a lot. The thought process is that you're not going to need that money for several years, maybe even several decades. And so maybe you don't care as much about stability and you care a lot more about the long term growth of your overall investment portfolio. And so I agree with you. When you were younger, maybe you only need 10% of bonds. But as you get older, maybe you want to increase that percentage so that the closer you get to retirement, the more stable your portfolio is, so that the money that you need is available and ready for you when you are ready to take it out. So I agree with you. Maybe just a smaller percentage as you're younger and then increasing that percentage over time. Now, how you increase that percentage over time varies from person to person. Some people will use the formula of 120 minus their age to get them the percentage of stocks that they should have in their portfolio, under the understanding that whatever is left, you should put in bonds. So, for example, if you're 30 years old, 120 minus 30 is 90. So, 90% of your portfolio should be in stocks and the remaining 10% in bonds. If you're 40, 120 minus 40 is 80. So 80% of your portfolio in stocks, the remaining 20% in bonds. And so that's a good formula. Some people will be a little bit more conservative and they'll use the formula of 110 minus their age or 100 minus their age. But the thought process is the same, is that you start off with a smaller percentage of bonds when you were younger and you increase that percentage over time as you age. Now, you mentioned really wanting to know how bonds work. I think this is important because the more you learn about bonds, I think the more confusing they can become. So I don't blame you for being like, hey, they're a little boring and sometimes they're a little confusing, if I'm being honest. And so let's kind of start from the beginning. So, what are bonds? I think of bonds as an IOU. Somebody needs some money. When you buy a bond, you are essentially loaning somebody, some entity, some company, some organization the money that they need. And in return, they are going to pay you back what you loaned them plus interest. So it's an IOU, it's a loan. You are loaning somebody some money and they are paying you back what you loaned them with interest. How do bonds work on a more global scale? All right, so think of it like there is an entity, there's a company, there's a corporation that wants to raise some money. And so they go to the underwriter and they say, hey, we want to raise, I don't know, $2 billion. Can you help us issue bonds? Now, your first thought might be, well, why doesn't that company or that organization just sell some products and raise the money that way? And the answer is they're trying to, but maybe they're not selling enough. Maybe they need to raise or have a lot more money in a short period of time. Think about the government. Maybe they want to improve the roads and they just don't have enough tax revenue to do that. Think about the federal government. Maybe they want to provide discounts to homeowners and they just don't have the revenue or the money to do that. So anyway, you have a company, you have an organization, you have a government that needs some money for a specific project, and they need a lot of money within a shorter period of time. And let's say it's like billions of dollars. So they go to the underwriter and they say, hey, we want to issue some bonds. The underwriter says, okay, cool, I'm going to handle the logistics. First thing the underwriter does is they basically say, okay, how much do you want to raise? $2 billion. Let's sell as many as we can in larger chunks and sell us, instead of trying to get tons of people to purchase $10 worth of bonds, why don't we try to sell them in chunks of like millions? Maybe one entity wants to purchase 10 million and another entity wants to purchase 20 million. And so you sell them in large chunks on a primary market. And then once you sell as many as you can on the primary market, then those large chunks are separated into much smaller chunks. And it is those smaller chunks that are sold to individuals on the secondary market. And the difference between the primary market and the secondary market is, one, the chunk of bonds, so the amount that you buy at one time, and also the fees. And so whenever you are buying individual chunks of bonds on the secondary market, usually there's an added fee, AKA a spread. So the person that was selling you the smaller chunk kind of makes a little bit of a profit as well. So in the big picture, that's kind of how that works. The interesting thing about bonds is there's no exchange, if you will, to kind of buy all the bonds that you want at one time. Like there is the stock market exchange, right? You can go and you can purchase a stock from, I don't know, Netflix or Disney or Google or whatever very easily. That's not the way it works for bonds. Most bonds, if you're purchasing an individual bond, they're purchased through independent dealers and servicers, and sometimes there's added fees and things like that. The only bonds that you can kind of purchase directly are government bonds, and that's through their website of Treasury Direct. So, one thing to note about bonds is kind of how they work. An entity, an organization wants to raise money, they go to an underwriter, underwriter kind of separates those bonds into big chunks. They try to sell as many as they can. And then those big chunks get separated again into smaller chunks. And you, as an individual, will purchase a smaller chunk on the secondary market. The thing to know is that when you're doing that, you're oftentimes paying a fee in order to do that. And so if you want to avoid fees and purchase them directly, then you might want to stick to governmental bonds that can be purchased through Treasury Direct. So hopefully part one, that makes sense. But Brittany, let me know if I lost you somewhere in there.
You didn't lose me. You didn't lose me. So thank you for breaking that down. Whenever I think about bonds, I think about it as an IOU. I understand that. I am giving somebody some money and they're paying me interest back over time. Just think about basically us being the bank and loaning out money. So, like, I get that. I understand that. Thank you for explaining how it works. So they need money. I got money, but I also want to understand, okay, what are the fees that are going to be associated with this purchase and some of the other nuances, because I think that bonds have a bit more nuances as you talked about. Like there are these larger chunks and then they're selling the smaller chunks on the secondary market. And there's so many different types of bonds. So that's kind of where it gets a little confusing is how are there so many types of bonds? Why are there so many types of bonds? And I think you really highlighted that. It could be anybody who needs money or any entity that needs money. That could be the federal government, a small municipality, that could be a company that needs money. And so we have our pick of who do we want to loan our money to and what are the terms of that agreement? What are the interest rates over time? When I think about bonds, a couple of things that come to mind is my grandmother would always purchase a savings bonds when we were younger. She would purchase a savings bonds. In fact, I have some right in front of me. So she would purchase them for like $25 and then they would appreciate over time with the maturity date of about 30 years where we can cash them in and not forfeit any of the growth, etc. But I really don't understand all of the logistics. The other type of bonds that I am acutely aware of is TIPS. So Treasury Inflation Protected Security Bonds. And this was all the rave when inflation was very high during the pandemic. So Alicia, I think I throw those two out there because one, it's like, how do we know which bond we should purchase? And how do we understand some of the terms of the agreement and the fees? So can you tell us a little bit more about the different types of bonds and how we should approach adding them in?
So when you purchase a bond, you become the lender. You're the lender because you loaned the money to the organization, right? The issuer is the person or the organization you are lending money to. So that's the lender and the issuer. You are the lender, they are the issuer. When you purchase an individual bond, there's something called the par value or the face value, and that's just the amount that the issuer promises to pay you by a certain date. So they say, okay, we're going to pay you an extra, I don't know, $100 by 2030 or something along those lines. The sum is the original principal. So the sum is the amount that you actually loaned to them. The maturity date is when you're going to be paid back. The coupon is the interest that you were earning on that money. And so those are some of the logistics, some of the bond terms. Something to keep in mind is whenever you are buying bonds from the government, technically there are notes and bills and bonds, and that just is separated by the maturity date. So if you are loaning money to the government and you're like, okay, I need my money back in less than a year, then that's technically a bill, a treasury bill. If you're loaning money to the government and you're like, okay, I don't need it back in a year, but I need it back in like a few years, then that is technically a treasury note. And then if you are loaning money to the government for decades, then that is considered a treasury bond. And so when you are loaning money to the government, they use slightly different terms, and that can be to your advantage, right? Let's say you're like, Leisha, I'm trying to buy a house, and I know that I want to buy a house in exactly 4 years, but I want my money to earn a little bit of interest over those 4 years. What should I do? How should I invest my money, if you will? Well, one option is to just keep it in a savings account, but then it won't really be earning much interest. Another option is to put it in a high yield savings account so it'll earn some interest. And as we're recording this right now, the interest that you could earn by putting your money in a high yield savings account is pretty good. It's around 3 or 4%. But maybe you want to earn a little bit more interest. And so maybe you might consider purchasing a bond or a treasury note or a treasury bill. And maybe you purchase, in this case, a treasury note that will mature in exactly 4 years. Right. So, 4 years when you're ready to buy that house, you will get your money back with interest. And so that's one way. And that's one reason why people might buy bonds or treasury notes or treasury bills of different years. Of course, if you are buying those things for your retirement and your retirement is decades away, then maybe you buy bonds that mature much later. When it comes to the different kinds of bonds, you're right. These things can really trip people up. And there are a gazillion types of bonds with tons of different nuances. So I won't get into the weeds too much, but I do think it's helpful, as you stated, to really understand the different kinds of bonds. So the first way that I like to break this down is by breaking this down into two main types: nominal bonds and inflation protected bonds. What do I mean by nominal bonds? Nominal bonds are your conventional bonds that you loan money, they pay you back a set amount in real dollars. They say, hey, you loaned us $1,000, we're going to pay you back $1,500 on whatever date we agreed upon. That's a nominal bond. They're going to pay you back in real dollars. Then you have inflation protected bonds, and they're going to pay you out a rate that is adjusted for inflation. So let's say you loaned them $1,000 and they're going to say, okay, we're not only going to pay you back $100, but if inflation increases by 10% over that time, we're going to pay you the money that we promised plus an extra to account for inflation. Because one of the interesting things about bonds is that when you're loaning money to people and they're paying you back, if they're paying you back over time, especially over a long period of time, the value of that dollar might have decreased, if that makes sense. Things get more expensive over time. So if you loan somebody $100 and they pay you back $100 10 years from now, well, you're going to be able to buy less things with that $100 10 years from now than you could have today. And so the thing about inflation protected bonds is they account for that. And so when I'm thinking about bonds, I kind of separate it out into those two broad categories. Is it a nominal bond, a conventional bond that's going to pay me out in real dollars, or is it an inflation protected bond that's going to account for the fact that things get more expensive over time? And I'm breaking it out this way because I think one of the good things to do, one of the smart things to consider whenever you're purchasing bonds is maybe I want a little bit of both. Maybe I want some nominal bonds and maybe I want some inflation protected bonds. So those are the two broad categories that I like to break them down. And then as a physician who is progressing into the higher tax bracket, I also like to break down other kinds of bonds and also consider their tax treatment. The first kind of bonds that I like to think about are corporate bonds. That is me loaning money to a corporation. So you buying a bond from Disney, for example, you're loaning money to Disney. You buying a bond for Google, you're loaning money to Google. So you are loaning money to a corporation and they're going to pay you back your money with interest over time. When you purchase those bonds, the money that you make in interest, you have to pay federal and state taxes on. So those are corporate bonds. The next broad category of bonds is what I kind of already talked about, and those are federal bonds. So that is you loaning money to the federal government and its agencies, and they'll pay you back over time. And with that, you pay federal and state taxes when you purchase federal bonds. So you're going to pay federal and state taxes on the interest that you earn from that. And then you have treasury bonds, and this trips people up. They're like, okay, what's the difference between a treasury bond and a federal bond? So a treasury bond is you loaning money to just the government, generally for its operations, but you are not loaning money to federal agencies. What's the difference? So the federal government is like the actual departments of the federal government versus a federal agency are other associated organizations. So one way to think about this is like mortgage products. So you've heard of like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Those are federal agencies. They're not actually part of the federal government. And so when you purchase a federal bond, you're loaning money to the federal government and its agencies, like those mortgage companies I just mentioned, versus when you purchase a treasury bond, you're only loaning money to the federal government, usually for its operations. And the reason why this matters is because when you purchase a treasury bond, those are state tax free, but you still have to pay federal taxes. Versus when you purchase a federal bond, you pay state and federal taxes. So I just wanted to make that distinction because I think that's interesting. And then the other kinds of bonds are muni bonds or municipal bonds. That is you loaning money to the state government or your local government. So maybe the federal government isn't trying to raise money, but your state might. Maybe the state of California needs to raise money or the state of Massachusetts needs to raise money. And whenever you purchase a muni bond or a bond where you're loaning money to a state or a local government, those are federal tax-free and they're state tax-free if you're purchasing them in the state that you live in. And so for folks who are in the highest tax brackets, they're really looking at muni bonds because they'll have to pay less money in taxes. And so I talked about corporate bonds, I talked about federal bonds, I talked about treasury bonds, I talked about muni bonds. There are mortgage bonds or mortgage-backed securities. So you're purchasing products or groups of mortgages that are backed by real estate. There are inflation-protected bonds, a couple of types of those. I don't want to bore you, but I'll stop here just in case you have any questions about the different kind of types of bonds and some of their tax treatment.
Okay. So So, what I hear you saying is that when we're considering a bond, we have to understand that it's an IOU, that we are the lender and there's someone or some entity that we're purchasing this bond from that we're loaning money to. They will give us interest in return for the amount that we're loaning them. And we have to think about not only how or what company, but also what are we getting in return? So are we just getting real dollars, a fixed rate, or is that going to be an adjustable rate based upon inflation or not? It's probably best to have a little bit of both, just in case inflation is very high, then we get this added bonus in addition to whatever that little fixed rate is. And then what I also hear you say is that there are various types of bonds that all have different tax treatment. And when you say that we pay taxes, so that is going to be for federal taxes, our ordinary income rate. This is not capital gains tax on any interest that we get from the bonds. And I think that that is really important to understand. One of the questions that I have, Leisha, is since there's so many and since they're different, do we have to know all of these details, or are there bond funds and things that we could also purchase that maybe has a mix of them that allows us to diversify the types of bonds, diversify the tax treatment so that we can maybe make this a little bit easier and less complicated without having all of this in our brains like you have in yours?
You're right. There are certain bond funds that have a mix of some of these, but there's no bond fund that has a mix of all of these. And so I mentioned the different types because there are pros and cons to each type.
Hmm.
Corporate bonds are more risky because you're loaning money to a corporation. But because they're more risky, you can probably earn a higher interest rate if you purchase corporate bonds. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Treasury bonds are less risky. And so you can rest assured that you're probably going to get your money back. But because they're less risky, you earn a lower interest rate. And so you're kind of balancing how much risk do you want to take versus what do you want your return to be? And so that brings me to something that I think is really important to go over, which is like, what are the risks of bonds, right? How do you think about this? And when you think about the risks of bonds, there are three main risks. The first is credit risk. What does that mean? Is the company likely to pay you back your money? We want to make sure that they are, credit worthy. We don't want them to be what we call junk bonds, these bonds that companies that maybe don't have a high track record or are likely to default. You don't want to loan money to a company and then them default and go bankrupt and then you don't get your money back. And so there's credit risk. Can you trust that the company, the organization, the government that you loaned your money to is actually going to pay you back? So that's what credit risk is. When it comes to the federal government and the treasuries, they are high credit worthy. The US has not defaulted on bonds. They are the most credit worthy types of bonds that you can purchase. So because of that, a lot of people like treasury bonds. They like loaning money to the United States federal government. But also because of that, you earn less interest on the money when you purchase federal bonds and treasury bonds than you could have if you purchased corporate bonds, for example. So the first risk is credit risk, right? Are they going to actually pay you back? The second risk is inflation risk. Inflation risk. I talked about this earlier. If you loan money to somebody and they don't pay you back for 10 years and then they finally pay you back your money, well, now your money is worth less, right? Now you can buy less with that set amount of money. Because if inflation is high, if things get substantially more expensive over time, then your money's worthless. And so you're going to want some sort of inflation protection or, some added payments to account for the inflation. So the first risk is credit risk. Are they going to pay you back? The second risk is inflation risk. Is your money going to be worth the same when you finally do get it back? And then the third risk is term risk. And this can sometimes trip people up. And that is basically the loss of the value of your bonds. So this really comes into play if you want to get your money back before you're supposed to get your money back. So let's say you purchase a bond for 10 years, but you actually need your money back in 4 years. Then you need to sell your bond. How do you reconcile it at that time? The term risk. The way this is explained to me, the way I understand it, is that this also factors in based on interest rates in the current economic climate. The general rule of thumb is that if interest rates rise, the value of your bonds will fall. That happens because if interest rates rise, people are going to want to buy new bonds with a higher interest rate, and they're not going to want your bond with a lower interest rate. And so if interest rates rise, the value of your current bond will decrease. In reverse, if interest rates fall, the value of your bond will increase because people will say, well, I don't want to buy the new bond at the lower interest rate. I want to buy your bond from you that has a higher interest rate. And so there's that term risk, okay? And the thought process is the longer the term, the more susceptible you are to interest rates rising and falling. So if you buy a bond that doesn't mature until 30 years, you're more susceptible to term risk because interest rates are likely to change a lot in that time period than if you bought a bond that matured in only 1 year.
I think that this is really important because when we are considering bonds, or for me at least, when I'm considering bonds, I think of it as very low risk. And what you're saying is that Yes, it is lower risk compared to maybe stocks, but it is not without risk. And so, therefore, we must consider kind of the pros and cons of the types of bonds that we are purchasing. I want to ask a question specifically regarding the term risk and also the inverse relationship with interest rates. Is
Mhm.
this only when you are selling your bond per se? What I hear you saying is if you have a long term bond, say the maturity date is 30 years, and maybe when you purchased it, the interest rates were low, and then you want to sell it during this 30-year term, or you're going to cash it in, like how is that bond, if you're already set at a fixed rate, how is that bond more susceptible to the term because of the interest rate fluctuation? So I guess that's where I'm kind of a little caught up in understanding the value with the inverse relationship of the interest rate.
Great question. You are right in that if you purchase a bond directly from Treasury Direct for 30 years with a 30-year term, that bond is going to be worth what it said it was going to be worth when you cash it in 30 years. However, most people don't purchase bonds directly from Treasury Direct. They purchase bond funds.
I see.
And when you purchase bond funds, the value of the bond fund may fluctuate based on current interest rates because they are buying and selling bonds. Do you get what I'm
I
saying?
see.
Then that term risk does matter.
Mhm.
And so hopefully that helps to clarify that. And in terms of bond funds, this is where all this kind of comes together. Me talking about treasury bonds versus federal bonds versus corporate bonds versus loaning money to the federal agencies versus the federal government versus your state government and all this stuff. A lot of people, they're like, this is way too complicated. I am not trying to purchase a bond from the secondary market and pay all these fees that I don't understand. Nor am I trying to go on Treasury Direct and purchase bonds directly with the government website that leaves much to be desired. I would rather purchase a bond fund that has all these different kind of bonds in it, and then I'm good to go. So a lot of people don't purchase individual bonds, they purchase bond funds. And what I think is really interesting is to understand what's in that bond fund. Most people, through their job, have access to a total bond market index fund from the United States, total international bond fund from around the world. Maybe they weren't aware of this. Maybe they just invest money in their retirement plan. Well, newsflash, if you didn't pick how you wanted that money to be invested, a part of it is invested in a total bond fund, right? And so most people, whether they know it or not, have some money invested in a total bond fund. What is in that bond fund, I think is important to understand. It's not just you loaning money to the federal government. Each bond fund's a little bit different, but if you purchase the Vanguard Total Bond Fund, for example, 47%, almost 50% is in treasuries. What does that mean? You loaning money to the federal government for its operations. 27% is in corporate bonds, you loaning money actually to corporations. 22% of it is in mortgage-backed securities and mortgage-related bonds. Well, maybe you didn't think that was an issue, but then you remember 2008. And 4% are in other kinds of bonds. What's important to know is that there are no savings bonds in these bond funds. There are no inflation protected bonds in these bond funds. There are no foreign bonds in these bond funds. There are no private bonds in these bond funds. For a lot of people, purchasing or buying the total bond index fund is decent, but it has a lot more risk than I think people realize in terms of the amount that's invested in corporate bonds and the amount that's invested in mortgage related bonds. And so some people are like, that's a little bit more risky than I thought it was. Other people will say, okay, I'm fine with that percentage. I'm sure it's okay. But they're shocked to learn that there's no inflation protection in those bonds. And so one of the reasons to consider adding something else, another type of bond index fund, is if you want that inflation protection. Maybe you want to do like I do, where when it comes to the percentage that I have in bonds, half of my bonds are in total bond market fund. That's totally fine. But then the other half, I actually have an inflation protected bonds. So that's in TIPS or I bonds. So when it comes to inflation protected bonds, there are two main types, TIPS and I bonds. So TIPS is, as you mentioned, Treasury inflation protected securities. And then there's I bonds, inflation protected bonds. You may be asking yourself, Leisha, what's the difference? So the difference in TIPS versus I bonds is one, how you purchase them. You can usually purchase TIPS directly from the federal government or in an index fund. I bonds can only be purchased through Treasury Direct. So one is how you purchase them, but the biggest difference is how they account for the inflation. When it comes to TIPS, the inflation amount is factored in by adjusting your principal. So your principal changes based on the rate of inflation, and then you earn a set amount of interest over time. And I bonds is the exact opposite. Your principal stays the same, then the amount of interest that you earn fluctuates based on inflation. And you may be thinking to yourself, okay, tomato, tomato, who cares? The other difference is the tax treatment. So with TIPS, you actually pay taxes on the amount of money that your principal increases or decreases each year. And so some people don't like that because they feel like they're paying taxes on money they haven't fully received yet. Versus I bonds, you actually defer that interest until you redeem the bond. And so I bonds have a little bit better tax treatment, in my opinion, than tips do. And so this is one reason why one might purchase I bonds versus tips or vice versa. I like to keep my portfolio simple. So I purchase a tips index fund. And so I purchase a group of tips and I purchase them through an index fund. And that's usually purchased in my retirement account. So I'm not having to pay any taxes on that money. And I can rest assured that I have some inflation protection in my portfolio. I know I said a lot. Hopefully I didn't confuse you, but feel free to ask questions.
Yeah, I think this is great. One of the things that I hear you saying is that we should know about how these different types of bonds are included in a bond fund. Like, if we want to simplify this process, maybe not understand all of the details, at least to take a look to see the composition, the allocation of types of bonds, because federal bonds and treasury bonds are going to have a different risk than a corporate bond. And so, if you understand that corporate bonds are going to be a little bit higher risk, maybe you don't want to take on all of that risk in your bond fund because you expect it to be more conservative and add that stability in. And so, if that is the case, maybe you do want to do something that is more of treasury bond instead of corporate bonds. And so, looking for those bond funds that has a composition based on your risk profile. And the other thing that I hear you saying is that these bond funds do not have inflation protection. So, if you opt for a bond fund for simplicity, then also elect for some type of inflation protected bond to supplement that bond fund. For me, that's enough. That is enough, because you get into the complexity of understanding, okay, which is federal taxes, which is state taxes. I do know that for our muni bonds, we don't pay state and local taxes and federal taxes. So federal taxes and then state and local taxes if you live in the area. So like I have looked specifically for Massachusetts muni bonds and added those to, our taxable brokerage account in order to decrease some of the taxes. So I think having these thought process of, okay, what is the risk of the bond? What is the composition? And then understanding some of the tax treatment and how do we make it simple for ourselves so it adds that level of stability without adding additional complexity.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Most people, like I said, are not going to purchase individual bonds. And so they may not care the tax treatment of a corporate bond because they're not purchasing individual corporate bonds. And so for them, it's like, hey, I want to keep things simple. I'm not trying to keep track of where I have to pay taxes and where I don't. Let me just purchase a bond fund. I like that idea. Okay, bond funds don't have inflation protection. So let me add a regular bond fund and an inflation protected bond fund. Case closed. And I think that that's a good way to look at it. The reason why I mentioned the tax treatment is because this also comes into play when you talk about money market funds. Just to go back and just make sure we're on the same page. A lot of people are saving money, whether it's their emergency fund, money for a house, a down payment, a new car, a wedding, whatever it is, you're saving chunks of money. And then the question becomes, where are you saving that money? And for a lot of people, maybe it's in a savings account that's not earning interest. For other people, it's in a high yield savings account that is earning a good amount of interest. But for other people, they are actually saving money in a money market fund. Think about it like a savings account that's at a brokerage firm. So maybe you have money in the Vanguard money market fund or the Fidelity money market fund. So there's different kinds of money market funds. And how you pay taxes on the interest that you accrue in those money market funds also is according to this, right? So if you have all of your money or a portion of your money in a regular money market fund that's at Vanguard, the default option is the federal money market fund, in which case you're going to pay federal taxes and state taxes on the interest that you earn. But if you have your money in a money market fund, then you're not going to pay federal or potentially state taxes on that money. And so I just wanted to mention the tax treatment because maybe you're not purchasing individual bonds, but maybe you do have money saved in a money market fund. And which money market fund you have your money saved in will determine how you pay taxes on the interest you earn on that money.
This is good to know. It is definitely something for people to consider. We're not trying to complicate your lives. We're trying to give you all the financial wisdom, but the tax treatment is very important because as high income earners, tax is one of the biggest expenses that we pay. So something to think about. And what I hear you saying is that if you elect for a money market fund to be your savings account, that's no problem. You do you, but also understand that the default is going to be a federal money market fund, which will have tax implications more so than a muni or municipal money market fund. So why not elect for the municipal one, save a little bit on taxes, especially as that tax drag is going to decrease the amount of interest that you're accruing on that. I've learned a bit, Leisha. I like that you gave me enough detail. If I want to, I'm going to go back and listen to this episode. What did Leisha say about these corporate bond funds and the tax treatment? And if I choose not to, also feel very comfortable and confident that I can choose a bond fund and choose an inflation protected fund and I'm good. And so, I'll figure out how to pay the taxes later and just allow that money to grow and understand that it's going to afford me some additional stability and maybe even as a possibility, outperform the stock market at times. So I think that this is really, really informative. Is there any like missing piece, high yield information that we need to consider when we're evaluating bonds and considering incorporating them into our portfolio?
Yeah, and I think it is one thing to keep in mind is balancing these things. One question that people may have is if the inflation protected bonds are going to account for inflation and the other bonds don't, why would I ever buy the other bonds? And the answer to that question is the other bonds may give you a higher interest rate. And so now you've got to balance, okay, I could earn more money purchasing these bonds, but it's not going to account for inflation versus I will earn less money, but it will account for inflation purchasing these other bonds. So you got to balance that. Same thing when you compare the money market funds, like maybe I should just purchase a muni fund. That seems great. I don't have to pay federal estate taxes. Well, you're also going to earn less on your money than if you put your money in a federal money market fund. Do you get what I'm saying? So you're kind of balancing those two things. Do I want to earn more money overall or earn less money? Knowing that the money that I do earn, though, accounts for inflation. So you really kind of have to weigh those factors when you try to. The other thing is that for a lot of people, I think the solution might be have a percentage of your bonds in these larger total bond funds that have a combination of different kind of bonds, but then also have a percentage of your bonds in these inflation protected bond funds, right? But then when you go to purchase those, the question that you might have or what you might notice is that the inflation protected index funds have different term links. So it might be a short-term inflation protected bond index fund, an intermediate inflation protected bond term, a long-term inflation protected bond index fund, right? And so then the question becomes like, which one do I choose? And that's where that term risk that I mentioned comes into play. If you purchase short-term inflation protected bonds, you can rest assured that the value might stay the same over time. So you're going to have less fluctuation, but then because you have less fluctuation, you might earn less money overall. If you purchase in an immediate term, it's going to be somewhere in the middle. If you purchase a long term, maybe there's more fluctuation, but maybe you have a higher rate of return at the end. And so you're kind of, again, balancing those different kinds of risks, so to speak, of bonds. But hopefully I didn't confuse people too much. I just wanted to mention that, hey, there are different kinds of bonds. It's probably helpful for most people to have some percentage of bonds that increases as they age and to also maybe consider a total bond fund and an inflation protected bond fund when you're figuring out your overall asset allocation.
Sounds great. Having a simple approach to creating our portfolio really, really helps to decrease the overwhelm because there are so many details. And I am grateful that there is someone like Leisha who understands all of these details. But as for me, I'm going to be big picture and, what they say, keep it simple, smart person. So there we go. Leisha, thank you so much for breaking this all down. And I think that we have definitely left the people with some great considerations on how to do this. If you do nothing else, what Leisha is saying is to purchase a bond fund and purchase some type of inflation protected bonds. And then to think about your money market fund and also consider the tax implications of that. Everything comes with its own pros and cons. And so this episode is to help you to be aware of what the pros and cons, you know what they say, bigger risk, bigger reward. But in your bonds, if you're using this for a more conservative approach to add some stability, do you actually want to take on those risks in your bond fund? Do you? But we just want to give you the information so that you can make very informed and wealth minded money decisions. And with that, I think it's time for some fun money. Leisha, what are you spending your money on?
Well, I was going to say something else, but as I'm in my office, I'm looking at this big box of what I just ordered. So I was like, maybe I should mention this. So I have several friends that have just gotten married. One in particular, I mentioned going to a wedding in Jamaica for one of my med school friends. It was a destination wedding. So I spent so much on the wedding and getting there. I actually didn't get her a gift at the time. I was reminded that I hadn't gotten her a gift. I don't know, something just reminded me. And I thought, oh my goodness, I got to get her a wedding gift. She's somebody that's really important to me. And usually, one of my go to wedding gifts, hopefully, this episode comes out after I give her the gift. Usually, one of my go to wedding gifts is custom made champagne glasses with the bride and the groom's name on them with the date of their marriage and Italian wine. The reason I do that is I love wine. And I always think even people who don't drink, maybe they want to put a little bubbly of whatever their favorite beverage is. But I think it's cool to have wine glasses with your name on it, especially if you get married, just to like remember that occasion. So I think that's cute. And I usually get Italian wine because about maybe 15 years ago, 10 or 15 years ago, my family and I went on a European vacation through London, Paris, Switzerland, and Italy. And Italy was my favorite. I just love eating pasta and gelato. And I also love wine, of course. And we were at this particular restaurant in Tuscany. I will never forget it. It was the most amazing food I'd ever had. The starter pasta, the antipasta, the actual entree, the desserts, all of it was amazing. But probably the most memorable part of that dinner in Tuscany with my family was the blue champagne. This is the only place that I'm aware of in the world that actually sells blue champagne. And I have always heard of the wedding saying, you got to get the bride, what is it? Something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue. And so I like to give my friends their something blue, which is custom made Italian champagne, and it's blue. So I called my brother because usually he imports the wine from Italy. And I was like, hey, do you have another bottle I can use? And he was like, nope, I'm out. So I was like, okay, I'll order it this time. And so ordered some bottles of the blue champagne so that I could give her one with these custom made champagne glasses.
That is so cute and thoughtful. Girl, I'm gonna have to steal that idea. Can you just put a list of all of your gifts for all occasions on a spreadsheet for me? You know that this is not my strong suit. So I love that. I've never seen blue champagne. I want to taste it. Like, what does it taste like? How do they make it blue? I have so many questions. I think it would be extremely cute to have it in the champagne flutes or whatever they're called, glasses, and toast, on their anniversary or whatever. So that is very, very cute. Oh, Alicia, you do such a great job gifting. And I am so serious about that spreadsheet. So just send it over. Share Google Doc. Well, speaking of gifts and celebrating marriage or a relationship, I too am spending my money on celebrating a relationship. This is not a marriage. My best friend and I met in Chicago. I was there for a conference. She was there visiting her aunt, and we went out to dinner. And we're looking at the menu, and then the waitress comes over and she's like, oh, actually, we have this fantastic date night special. I'm like, oh, yeah, this is my date for 27 years because my girlfriend and I have been friends since we were like 11 or 12. Yes, this is my longest standing relationship right here. Let's use this date night menu. And so I treated my best friend a 4-course meal, and we had a really great time just enjoying each other's company and reflecting over the years. It's a little bit different, not as thoughtful as yours, but still a celebration of love, commitment, and a longevity of relationship.
No, I love that. I love good food. I love when my friends invite me out. It's great. I don't know. There's something about like eating a great meal, good quality food with people that you deeply care about. That is just a great experience for me. That is one of the ways that I like to spend money besides travel. It's just on amazing food, particularly dinner that I didn't have to cook, sharing it with people whose company I truly enjoy. And so I love that. I love it with my friends. We try to contact each other if it's been a month or so, like, hey, girl, let's have dinner. And sometimes it's a process figuring out a day that we're both free. If you can find those days that you guys are both free and enjoy a wonderful meal together, I think that is amazing. So I'm sure that she will remember this for a long time and welcome the idea of doing it even more often.
Oh, yes, definitely. We're those types of friends where we send text messages and threads, and then we respond maybe a couple of days later. But we don't see each other as often. So this really filled my cup, and I hope that we can do it again. So, all right, people. Well, we hope that this episode was interesting to you. If you got to listen to it again, that's okay, because I will also be listening to it again and learning from Leisha. But we hope that you take home the big picture and you add some bonds into your portfolio. And until next time, we will see you in the next episode. Hello, and thank you for listening to our podcast. And because of that, we have something for you, our Wealthy Minds Blueprint.
Have you ever thought to yourself, I wish I could be better with money? Do you want to start investing and saving for retirement, but keep delaying because you don't know where to start? Our Wealthy Minds Blueprint is here to help.
This guide will teach you what you didn't learn in your training, so you can stop being confused about money and start taking what we call wealthy-minded action.
We'll help you become a master of your finances and simplify investing so you can get started today. Take control of your financial future by downloading your free copy of the Wealthy Minds Blueprint now and start building the wealth you deserve.
One of the most important things you can do is ensure you have long-term disability insurance. Long-term disability insurance secures your income if the unexpected happens and you are unable to work due to medical illness, chronic conditions, or an accident.
Unfortunately, all insurance agents aren't created equal. Some of them are so focused on making a sale that they fail to reveal certain necessary information, tell you about discounts available, or clearly explain the process. Prati Botto and his team at PKA Insurance Group are different. They have a reputation of putting people over profits and always doing what's best.
If you need life insurance or disability insurance, reach out to Pradeep and his team today. They will help you get the insurance you need with the service you deserve.
Hello, everybody. It's me, Brooke. I'm recording a little disclaimer. For my mommy, Dr. Brittany Halford, and her friend, Dr. Lisa Taylor. Just so you know, they're not financial advisors, tax professionals, lawyers, or financial planners. Everything you hear is for education and entertainment. It's not strict financial advice, you know? So use your best judgment, chat with a tax professional, and all those other people that you need to talk to. Thanks for tuning in today. Keep cruising on your journey to wealth and wellness. Bye-bye.